what you'll notice now that we've created our variable is that we have over here on our Scratch, we actually have an area that says username and a value of 0. So what we could actually do is, if we say set username, we could actually type in our own name. So I can put in Mrs. Jaggs, for instance, and what you'll see is that this hasn't actually changed this. But the reason for that is because this needs to actually be, it's part of the program itself. So it's not going to work unless perhaps I double click it. And then you'll see username, Mrs. Jaggs. Excellent. You can also make that part of your script. Okay, so that when the green flag is clicked, it changes to Mrs. Jaggs. We could change this as well to Mr. Petty. So if I click the green flag, keep your eye on this, you should see that it changes now from Mrs. Jaggs to Mr. Petty. That's excellent. Now we've changed the username to Mr. Petty. What you need to know is that where it says Mr. Petty, or indeed it said Mrs. Jaggs, this is known as a string. So a string is information that you could generally enter using the keyboard, and a string forms part of our syntax in programs. Let's create some more variables, and I'd like to create a variable now that asks a question: what is the user's classroom? Okay, now who can tell me what is wrong with this at the moment? If you compare this, for instance, with what we already have here, how could I make that different? How could I make it better? Alright, there are some programs that do not like spaces and will not allow spaces in variables. So we have to make sure that we use the underscore, no spaces, and I'm going to use a capital C. So we've got camel case happening here. Capital U, capital C, underscore means that there's no spaces, but there is some separation between the two. This is now a happy variable. I'm going to click on OK. Let's make one more variable, and the variable we will ask is users underscore age. I'm going to click on OK, and now we have username, user's age, user's classroom. With all good variables, if you have a good variable, if somebody came into the room and they started playing this game that we're creating, they would be able to understand exactly what these variables were being used for. So what are they showing us and what are they about? So that should be very clear. So in our variable now, let's see if we can fill some information in. So we've already got username. Let's now put on there that we're going to set the user age, followed by set, and we're going to change that to user's classroom. Okay, so let's say I'm going to put in here that user age is 12. The user's classroom might be classroom TC5. Now, what you might notice in here is that I've actually got spaces in here, and it's okay to have spaces in a string, okay, but we don't want to have any spaces in a variable. So it's okay for spaces to be in a string because the computer recognizes the space as another keystroke, as another key that's pushed on the keyboard, so it's quite happy to recognize that. But when you're using a variable, try and use camel case, underscores, no spaces, no gaps in the actual text. Now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to change Mr. Petty's name here. I'm going to put in a name, a random name, and what we're going to do is we have to make sure that this script stops. So once it gets to the end, it knows where the stop is. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to click on Stop Script. Okay, so we're going to grab Stop this script and we'll let it sit there. So let's click on Run, And what you need to keep your eye on are these three variables sitting up here. Right, so we can now see that we've got Ariana, who's playing the game, classroom TC5, and the user's age is 12. So our variables are doing exactly what they should be doing. It's all well and good putting in names for people, but what we're actually doing is something that they call hard coding, where you don't give the user the option to put in their own content. So what we're going to do is we're going to change things up a little bit. So we're going to click on looks, and we're actually going to start making this so that the actual user can contribute and can actually type in, because otherwise every time you play the game it's always going to have the same person at the top unless they go into the program itself and change it. I've put down here say hello for 2 seconds. I think there's a nicer way of saying that, so I'm going to drag this back, and this is how we delete blocks that we don't want, is just dragging it back into this area here. I'm going to go into sensing, and I'm going to, instead of say, I'm going to ask them 3 questions. I think you can guess what the 3 questions are going to be. So we're going to start off with, what is your name? The next one would be, what is your age? Followed by, what is your classroom? All right. Now, the nice thing about asking these questions is that Scratch will actually give them an area to answer if we use this little block here. Okay, so it says answer. It's like a floating variable. You can use it. It's not a variable you've created, but it's a variable that's very useful to you so that the user can actually type in an answer and you can get the response that you're looking for. It's really important that we don't type in any variables that have got the word answer in it, because the program's already using that. So we have to make sure that we keep it really simple and we avoid answer at all costs. So what we're going to do is we're going to move these pieces of block where they should be. So we're going to say, what is your name? And over here where it says to Ariana, I'm actually going to put answer. So what happens is it will set the username to whatever their answer is. I'm going to right click on this and duplicate it, because we're going to need it again here, and we're going to need it again here. Alright, so the next question, what is your age? We're going to separate username and user's age, and we'll pop our last block in here, what is your classroom? And then the answer will come up. Let's have a look and see how we've done. So, what's your name? So I'm going to say Mrs. Jaggs. Tick on there and you'll see that this has changed. What is your age? Ooh, 21. And it should have changed it to 21. So what is your classroom? TC5. And hey presto, we've got Mrs. Jaggs, TC5, 21. It's done exactly what I've asked it to do. My script works. We can add to this if we wanted to. So we could actually get, if I go back onto looks, we could get Scratch to respond to us. So what he could be doing is he could say our username. So if we go back into our variables here, you'll see that you've got username here. We could drag that across and he could say username for 2 seconds. Okay, he could also say your age and your classroom. However, we're just going to try and pop this in here, and you can see that you can use these variables just like we used answer. Remember, this was a floating variable? Well, we've created our own variables that we can also use in a very similar way. So let's click on start and let's see what he says. So we're going to type in Ariana this time. How old are you? So I'm 12. What's your classroom? Let's say T1. And there you go. He says Ariana. Okay, isn't that excellent? I hope you enjoy that. Give it a go and see if you can maybe make up some conversations using variables yourself.